And welcome on into another edition of the Limitless Leadership Lounge. We're back for another week of a tri-generational conversation for emerging leaders. I'm John Gehring, as always, joined by Dr. Rehnuma and the coach, Jim Johnson. And today we're joined by another special guest as well, Norm Wielsch. He and I connected as he has just released his new book, and we're excited about that. And we'll touch on that a little bit later throughout the episode. But Norm has quite a story to tell, quite a story about facing adversity throughout life, making some mistakes, overcoming that adversity, and now after it all, seeking to help others. And that's the most admirable thing. And that's why we connected and why we wanted to have him on, because his story hopefully will move you and will be powerful for you as well. And hopefully help our young and emerging leaders learn a little bit more about the topics of PTSD, about the topics of mental health and counseling, and about so much more. So without any further ado, Norm Wielsch, thank you so much for being on today. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to your wisdom today.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Norm, let's go back a little bit in time, and let's just start to give our listeners some context here of who you are, and we certainly encourage them to look into you more. But what was this story? How did this begin? And let's go back, a few decades here, and just take us through what has led to some of your highs and lows, and where you are today.
Okay. Well, it's a very long story, but I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest version. When I was younger, my father owned an auto repair shop, so I was supposed to follow in the footsteps of my dad, but I didn't feel that as a calling. So I went on a police ride along at the age of, I think, about 22, and I just loved it. I felt that that was my calling. So I sent myself to a reserve academy. A police reserve is a volunteer officer that works under a sworn officer and has the same powers as long as he's working under the sworn officer. So I went that route and I enjoyed it. I changed my career, and I love the work, but no one ever told us that there was going to be some trauma involved. So about 2 months into it, my first serious call was a small plane crash. We have in our jurisdiction a mall, a shopping mall. Then they're right next to the mall is a freeway, and then right next to that freeway on the other side of the mall is a small airport. Well, one day on the 23rd of December, so you can imagine all the shoppers in the mall, there was a pilot trying to land, and I think he had some type of medical emergency. And he crashed through the ceiling of the mall down to like 40 yards where Santa was in line. Oh. And so when I responded to that, there was at least 14 dead and 70 seriously injured. It looked like a war scene. It was horrific. And I thought to myself, man, I can't believe this. But growing up with a strict father, he always said, pull your boots up, move forward. Don't think about it. And I was good at that. And I think that's what, I guess this could be an argued thing, but that's what made me a good police officer, I believe. I was able to compartmentalize all the things that I saw, so throughout my career, as 26 years, I've worked almost every position that you could in the police department. I worked traffic where there's some horrific accidents. I mean, dead children, beheadings, metal coming through the car, and just the robberies and suicides, everything you think of. The worst, I think, was the SIDS death, the sudden infant death syndrome, and the drowning deaths from toddlers. Those were really impactful on me, because I had two girls that were little at that time, and it really affected me. But again, I was able to push those emotions down and move forward. Little did I know that was going to be my downfall, because they didn't teach back then in the police academy. They taught, well, you got to exercise and you got to get your sleep and eat vegetables and fruit, and then you're going to be okay, right? No one ever said, hey, you're going to be suffering from these emotions and nightmares and stuff. So I got sick and tired of the death, and I worked narcotics for a little while at the police department that I worked, and I decided to go full-time narcotics, which is a state-run narcotics bureau for the state of California, the Department of Justice. And it's a rigorous testing process because they only take, the top of the rung of the police officers, because it is a very stressful job. Excuse me, I'm sorry. And I was hired there, and eventually a couple years later I got promoted. And then I saw more of a different issue, right? Now we're out of the suicides and we're out of the traffic accidents, but we're into the child abuse area, where normally people that are addicted to drugs tend to not take care of their children, right? So you'd go into a house and it would just be filthy, and the kids would be unbathed, and there would be no food in the fridge. And that's where we had to start taking kids away from their parents until they could get into a better position. And of course, that brought on its own stressful events. So about 1999, I was diagnosed with a neuromuscular disease, where it's pretty much neuropathy. So I had no feeling in my hands and my feet. And then it was complicated by another disease called Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, which is a deadening of the muscles in the extremities. So what happened was, not only did I have to endure I have no diabetes, but the neuropathy is a very debilitating disease. So I was required to wear braces, and I started to get these big blisters underneath my feet. They're called ulcers. So each time I got an ulcer, I was required to go through surgery. So I went through about 30 surgeries in a 10-year period. And I used up all my sick leave, all my vacation. Thank God I was well respected and well liked, that as soon as I got out of the hospital and was ready to at least walk in a boot or a cast, my bosses let me work light duty. So that would be desk duty. But of course, I'm not one to work at a desk. So I've got pictures of me working marijuana grows in my cast and pulling weeds. It's crazy what the first responders go through in order to make it appear that we're all good and well, right? So that caused a lot of stress internally, and I think that's what brought out the manifestations of the PTSD. I have complex PTSD, so that could pretty much remain dormant until something triggers it. And I think that the stress of not having sick leave, not having vacation when I was off, being possibly found out that this is a serious illness, because this is something that could have made me unfit for duty, and they could have, forced me to leave. And of course, in our heads, being a type A personality and a cop, you got to be a take control kind of person, right? And you can't let anyone see your weakness, because once somebody sees your weakness, then nobody will want to work with you. In other words, oh, I don't want Norm to come to my call because he's a psycho. He can't even deal with his own stuff. I don't want him messing up my stuff. Or, it's an ostracization where they just push you away. And I think it has something to do with their own mortality, because if they see another officer that's going through issues, they can think, oh, maybe this could be me too. So that's just a guess of mine, but these PTSD symptoms were getting so severe that I was afraid to go to sleep at night. The nightmares of all the deaths that I've seen were just haunting. They were literally, when I put my head down on my pillow, my mind was racing. I couldn't get to sleep. So one of my friends said, take some Ambien. So I went and got prescription for Ambien, and that was great. That put me to sleep. But man, the nightmares were so vivid. It was horrific. The intrusive thoughts, and during the daytime, you're anything that reminded you of something. Like when I was working traffic control, I was working the railroad tracks, and there was a person that was walking on the railroad tracks, and this train came through at over 60 miles an hour and hit this person. And you can imagine what a train does to a human body at that speed. So one of my triggers was railroad tracks. So I would approach a railroad track and I would start sweating. I would start having anxiety, and pretty soon I was having an anxiety attack. During all my surgeries, the doctors kept giving me opioids and opioids for the pain, but I had neuropathy. I didn't have any pain, but I kept taking the prescriptions because I thought, okay, well, maybe someday I'll have the pain. But then when I found that the opioids took the edge off of the PTSD symptoms, that's when I started to take them just to survive the day without having inner mental turmoil, And one of the things, I don't want to blame anybody, but one of the things that I was disappointed in was my agency. Over that 10-year period, I was on light duty, probably 4 years of that. And no one ever said, hey, how are you doing? You all right? What's going on? To just really sit with you. Sometimes I'd be in the hospital for 2-3 weeks at a time because of the infections I would get on my foot because of the open wounds. No one ever came to visit. It was really eye-opening that you think you're working a profession that's really tight-knit, but when it hits the fan, everybody just shies away from you. So eventually, I went on to be promoted to a task force commander, which entails every police department in the county would give a police officer to the task force, and we work narcotics in that entire county. And I would be in charge of all the officers. And that was a great job. I mean, my office was right where I grew up. My parents were still alive. I could go to my parents' house and visit and say hi. But it just, the PTSD took its toll on me. And eventually my youngest daughter got some liver tumors. And so we went to the doctor, and she was 24 at the time, but she was still my baby,
Right.
And they diagnosed her with these liver tumors. And they said that these tumors were so severe that only UCLA Medical Center could do this operation. And there was a 50% survival rate of the surgery. And that sent me in a downward spiral that I could never really recover from. 2 weeks later, I tried to commit suicide, and it just, it went downhill from there. And I got wrapped up with a person I thought it was a friend, and I was trying to do him a favor. And again, I'm not putting blame on anybody. It was all my decisions. Everything I did was my decision, but I'm just trying to show you the steps that I went through. And I ended up stealing some drugs out of the evidence room and giving it to this guy. And of course, the guy that he gave it to was an informant. And the next day I was arrested. Wow. So my crime spree lasted 2 weeks, but still I made those mistakes and those poor decisions. And I forgot to say, but during this whole time, I never believed in God. And while I was out on bail for 2 years, and God really moved in my life. And I don't want to bring this to a whole religious thing, but God just showed me how you can go through these trials in your life and you can come out of them better. And miraculously, my daughter was healed. The doctors can't explain it, because after I learned how to pray, the church I got into, we prayed for her. And I was sent to prison and had a 14-year sentence. I was in 1 year in the Santa Clara County Jail, and that was horrific. But I got a chance to read the Bible. I got a chance to talk with other people. Now I was segregated, but there was always be bars or a fence in between, and that's where I learned about people suffering. I would see people, and we would end up talking. They didn't know who I was, so they spoke freely. And that's where I learned of childhood trauma, and that the majority of the people that are in prison are really mentally ill, and they're suffering from trauma from the past. It was a real eye opener for me, because when I contacted drug addicts or alcoholics, I would say, well, just stop it. Well, when you learn about it, you can see that you just can't stop. It's a mental illness, and it needs to be worked through. All their past trauma needs to work through. So when they sent me to Fort Worth, Texas, for the federal prison. And the same day I got there, I got a job in the chapel, which has got to be divine intervention, right? And that's where I thrived. They had a seminary come in, Tyndale Theological Seminary came in there and taught classes. So I decided to take classes. I ended up learning more about theology and counseling, Christian counseling. And then God did another amazing thing in my life. He brought an ex-police officer that was doing a 18-year sentence for the same kind of thing, of stealing drugs and selling them on his own. But God had changed his life in prison too. And he, on duty, he ended up getting shot like 3 times and ended up killing. There's 3 separate incidents. I mean, this shows you the violence in LA. 3 separate incidents. He got shot and he had to kill 2 people, but there were justified shootings. They shot at him first. And it profoundly just changed him. And that's why he started getting into the criminality. So in prison, there was a pastor that changed his life, and they taught him it's a Christ-centered approach to healing. And that's why my book is called ChristCentered Healing, is because when we do secular counseling, everything revolves around talking, and then I'm not saying that secular counselors are bad, because a secular counselor here saved my life, teaching me the coping skills that I really needed to make it through that difficult point. But there was no healing, right? So I spent two years out on bail in secular counseling and psychiatry. And then I spent another year in counseling in prison. And it was very beneficial, don't get me wrong. Telling your story over and over again is very good. It gets everything out in the open, exposes it all to air, but there was no healing, right? So he taught me the Bible verses and what the Bible teaches about healing. And once I started going through those steps, which is very similar to the 12-step program that the AA has and other people have. And I was 1 year and I was healed. I haven't had a PTSD symptom now for 7 years. It's just been miraculous. And so I kept moving on with my education. I ended up getting a doctorate in Christian counseling.
Wow.
And when I was here in California in jail, they had a community college come in. They taught a 2-year drug addiction program. So I went through that, and I'm currently working now as a drug addiction specialist and doing pastoral care on the side at a men's residential facility.
Wow.
And I'm learning that the secular steps to healing, like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is really the same thing that God teaches, Right. So I'm seeing the parallels there, and I'm able to show these guys how to heal that trauma. And the reason why I'm out is because COVID. So there are blessings to COVID, even though it's a horrible thing. But because of my my medical history, they let me out 3 years early, and I'm on home confinement. But I'm free to go to work. I'm free to volunteer and go to church and stuff like that. Wow. So in a nutshell, that's about it. It was the worst time of my life, but no one's going to believe me, but I wouldn't change that right now for anything. I think if God gave me a do-over, because as a cop mentality, I was a real jerk. I everything is black and white to cops, right? You're either good or you're bad. There's no gray. There's so gray. I mean, back when I started, if you had a tattoo, you're a criminal. That's a jail tattoo. And now all the cops have sleeved up. It's just craziness. A beard. If you had a beard, we'd be looking at you all cross-eyed. So it's made me more compassionate. It's made me understanding why people do the things they do. And I think that's really necessary today for the cops. And I think that's where police today are missing the mark, is where they still have that old us versus them attitude, which is really not true, because there's people just trying to get along in life that have made some mistakes. They've got themselves in a position where you just can't pull out of certain life situations. I deal with homeless people every day, and after being in the residential facility for a few months, they want to go back to the homeless lifestyle. And I asked them, I said, how come you had a bed, you had 3 meals a day? Why would you want to go back to living in a tent under a tree or under a freeway? And they said, that's all I know. And that's where I can make the decisions I want to make. And it's all revolves around mental illness.
Right.
Sure.
And thank you so much for sharing this, Norm, because you are showing us, like, you went through that dark night of the soul. There is this term, the hero's journey, where a hero has to go through that dark night to find that dawn. And if we read all the leaders, those leaders who really made influence, from Jesus to Muhammad to Gandhi to Nelson Mandela, they all had to travel that path to find God. So I think you really went through that, but not only that, you seem to gain that courage and confidence to serve others. So I'm just curious, like, how does this mentality of serving others helped you to grow into this leader as you are today, inspiring so many people?
It's service is in me, I think, anyway. I think it's in one of those bred things because I wanted to be a cop and I wanted to
Right.
serve people. However, I believe that once you accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior, I believe that he changes you from the inside out. And the Bible basically says that God can allow us to go through some horrific things so when we're comforted by him, we can comfort others that are going through the same thing.
Right.
And I believe that it's part of the 12-step program, is to mentor others and to help others go through their addiction. And I think it's just part of what we're supposed to do as human beings, right? I believe that we get lost in that because this culture that we live in, the Western culture, is so self-centered, right? Everything is me, me, me. I'm going to step on people to get up the ladder. I'm going to do whatever it takes to have money, to have power, and it doesn't matter on what happens. But you see that the whole world doesn't think that way. And I believe that we have it wrong. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be ambitious. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be rich. But if we don't give back, we're missing the whole mark, So I believe that it not only helps with my recovery on helping others, but if I could give back a little bit, and I know this kind of almost sounds fake, but if I could help one person, the pain that I went through was almost worth it, right? Because to this day, there's police officers there that hate me. They won't talk to me. We have to call sometimes the police, and I think some of them know that I'm there, and they treat me really bad. And I get it. I tarnished the badge. It was a horrible thing to do. It was a great violation of trust. But therefore, the grace of God go I, right? I mean, I know a lot of officers that are alcoholics. I know a lot of them that are pill addicts. I've never taken illegal drugs, but since it's a prescription, we think it's okay. It's from a doctor. Hey,
Right.
How bad can it be? But when we're driving a patrol car high because we were taking 8 or 9 Vicodin, it's the same thing. So they're just one step away from where I was, right? It's just a DUI crash, killing somebody maybe. There's a lot of domestic violence because there's a lot of pent up anger. So who is the bigger sinner here? And if I can get across to them, hey, this is what happened. These are the mitigating factors of why this occurred, not putting down what I did because I made those bad decisions, but this could happen to anybody. So that's my future ministry, is to go to first responders. But because of what happened, it's going to be a very hard door to open.
Sure, absolutely. We're talking with Norm Wielsch. He's recovered from PTSD, and now he has his book ChristCentered Healing and his organization helping people who have suffered from PTSD. Norm, from a trust perspective, because you brought up that word, we talk about trust a lot in leadership as really an essential part of it. But you made that mistake, and you really damaged the trust of your former coworkers, I guess you would say. Now, how do you build back that trust? Is that something that's important to you? Because trust is sort of a, you could violate your trust and then you can take steps to build it back. Is it important for leaders like you to build that trust back, or is there some ships that have just sailed and you've moved on?
That, I guess I'm going to find that out in a few years. I believe you have to build back the trust, because they're not going to listen to me. If I walked into a police department right now, told my story and said, hey, once you start experiencing these nightmares, once you start experiencing anxiety attacks, you got to please seek help. Well, the first thing they're going to do is, hey, you're a dirty cop. Who's going to listen to you? But if I can build that trust, like through venues like yours, like the book, going around and talking to these guys individually about helping each other out. We don't have going to a counselor would be a huge mistake for any cops during my time. I hope and pray that it's all changed now, but back then, because they have the key to pulling your gun away, right? So if I went to my EAP and said, hey, I need to see a psychologist, go to a psychologist, say, last night I put a gun in my mouth and I almost pulled the trigger. The next call they make is going to be to your chief saying, hey, he's not fit for duty. So what happens next? Either I go to a desk or I get put off on just off duty on administrative leave. And then the rumors start flying. Oh, hey, he did this and he did that. That trust, I don't think, can be built up at that point. So I'm very, I recognize that trust is going to be very difficult to build up here. But I believe if I'm very transparent, and that's why I told you guys earlier that I'm open to anything, because I want to be transparent. I want them to know that this is coming from the heart. I'm not just trying to build up my reputation again, because I'm going to be 61 here. I got nothing to build my reputation over, but I just want to help people. I want to prevent them from going through the same things that I did. So it's a very difficult question to answer. Sure. I believe that you need to build the trust, but I'm hoping and praying that it's not going to be that difficult.
Sure.
Norm, you were obviously in a very stressful, police officers, people that work in fire departments, certainly there's other professions too that are very high stress. What would your advice? I know things are starting to change for more of the positive, but, one of the things you brought up early about the fact that it was, if you had a situation where in your experience, you had nightmares and, people in your profession often would use that as a weakness. What advice would you say to young police officers or people that are in high stress jobs or taking over maybe a new leadership position, like you had a few different ones? What were, and they're going through some real difficulty mentally. What advice would you give them?
The first piece of advice I would give them is to not take the job so seriously. That is easier said than done, but a police officer is not a job, it's an identity. And that's where we get lost in it. And that's where they get lost in it. So if you're no longer a police officer, you no longer have an identity, right? And that's what the stressful thing is. So we have more police officers that are committing suicide after retirement than we do during retirement. In the last 2 years, the suicide for police officers has just risen. I believe it's like 30%. Wow. We're almost losing more police officers now to suicide than we are to criminal activity that where someone murdered them, and that's a huge red flag to police departments. And I believe that you're correct that things are changing, and I believe that things are changing for the better. Back when I was on SWAT, someone would end up fatally injured, and we would just go back to patrol after that, and I saw a few years before I left that they began to do the critical incident debriefings, and they started to get things out and stuff like that. So I believe the change is there. The problem is that you do that job to help people, right? But no one wants to help us. Well, I shouldn't say us, I'm no longer there, but nobody wants to help them. And I think that's the huge thing. And helping each other is very difficult because, again, if I see you faltering and I see some personality changes in you, like making mountains out of molehills, that's one of the biggest things that I was experiencing. Some little event would happen and I would just start screaming and throwing stuff. It's quite possible that I might think to myself, wow, is this happening to me too? And then you're just throwing more stress on your own life. It's easier to ignore it and walk away than it is to deal with it. So the biggest thing would be not to be a police officer that it's their entire identity. The next biggest thing that I saw in myself was to have friends on the outside that can keep you balanced, right? That can keep you kind of anchored, because in this type of a job, and I believe in firemen, paramedics, doctors too, is it's difficult to connect with people that don't work this job, right? Especially police, because they think that you're out there killing suspects, like on TV, you kill 3 or 4 people, then the next day everything is fine and you're out there with your kids on the beach and stuff. But it's not that way, right? And when a friend asks, well, like, what'd you do yesterday? How do you explain to somebody that you were giving a 6-month-old infant CPR because they fell in the pool or they slipped in the tub, whatever the case may be, and do that straight face without any emotions? So what you do is you tend to hold those emotions in. My wife and my kids didn't even know what I went through. When I came home from work, my wife would say, how was your day? Oh, I was okay. I mean, I just saw a beheaded guy, but it was all right. Because if I were to tell her all this stuff that happened, she would be freaking out every day I left the house. So outside people normally don't intermingle with the first responder type culture. And that's a really bad thing for the cops and the firemen to do. I believe that they need to have outside influence other than just talking shop. Because when the cops get together, all they do is talk shop. And that's where we belittle life. I'm sure you've heard all the joke that, well, you haven't heard the jokes, but you've heard of cops that at a crime scene, they joke and they almost a morbid type of a humor. But we do that because we got to get through this, right? And we know that after seeing this guy with his head blown off from a shotgun, an hour later, we're going to be taking a burglary, in another neighborhood and trying to keep our stuff together. So those are the 2 biggest things. I agree with the healthy lifestyle, but the biggest thing for me is to have outside friends and don't take it seriously, because what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to talk about things. The way to get your trauma to begin the healing process is to get it out in the open. And in my book, I lay out, if you can't talk to somebody, you got to at least journal, get the stuff out and to just process it, and it'll never go away. You'll never unsee what you've seen, but at least it won't have such an impact in your life. But it's a very, very difficult thing for cops.
Absolutely. I think, Norm, it's an important thing to touch on. Exactly. Let's back up just a second and just PTSD itself. A lot of people think of, well, if you're not physically injured, what's the problem? If I can't see the evidence, what's the problem? But what do you say to someone who feels that way? How do you confirm the fact that a disorder like PTSD is just as physically real as in a shotgun wound or something like that? How do you argue that?
Well, there's some people that you can't argue to. My father, he was a World War II veteran, and when this happened, he basically disowned me because he didn't understand the mental injuries, right? The emotional trauma. But I believe that if we sit down and talk to somebody, because there's other ways of doing it. Like, yes, what we're talking about trauma with veterans, combat veterans or first responders. But really, we all go through traumatic events in our lives, or even just overwhelming life events. A divorce in most cases can be that overwhelming life event where, say, a spouse cheats on you and it's just something you can't get over. So that's a trauma that's going to affect you forever until you deal with it, until you take the power away. And to heal, you're going to have this hatred, this resentment. And that's why divorced couples have such a difficult, they fight with each other constantly. And there's no reason to. I mean, we just forgive each other, let's move on. But I know that's easier said than done for most. But I believe that when you speak to someone in those terms, okay, you know what, have you ever, was your father around? You know, no, my father wasn't around. Well, that's trauma right there. You know, 86% of all the inmates have suffered some sort of abandonment or abuse as a child. You know, so when you speak to him in terms of not combat veterans or first responders, but in real life situations, I believe that we've all been traumatized. And that's why I was first going to write this book to first responders. But then when I started talking to inmates and I realizing all their issues, I thought, wait a minute, you know, I've been through a divorce. I've been through that. Well, she took half my money, you know, blah, 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 blah. But in the bigger perspective, right? If we look at our life from a different perspective, we can see that's really not that big of a deal compared to what a lot of other people are going through.
Right. And
so, yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go. No, I'm so intrigued because you were talking about all the things that touches down the mental health and vulnerability. So often we are shying away from being vulnerable. But even from my life, I have seen, like, when you're vulnerable, it is not your weakness, but you get those people who really care about you, come to you, and they will help you. So seeking help is not weakness.
That's right.
It makes you stronger. Like, you are a strong person to seek help. So I was wondering, and you are embodying that consciousness and self-awareness because you had to walk that path of self-awareness. So with all your experiences, I feel that the police academy or young police force people, they can get so much information from your experiences. So walking that path, what mistakes you have made. And if you were in their shoe, like 20 years ago, and if somebody like you came and talked to you about those things, what are your take on this? If you had that experience of somebody mentoring you in this way?
To be honest, I would laugh. I was raised old school. You know, the old school cops are, let me give you an example of in the police academy, they teach only use as much force as necessary, right? So when a guy fights with you, you only use enough force to overcome that resistance so you can arrest that person. I was about 5-6 months on duty at the very beginning, and there was this guy that I tried to arrest, and he ran. I was better shape back then. I ran, I caught him, and the struggle was on. He really wasn't trying to hurt me. He was just trying to get away, right? But he ended up ripping my uniform, and I got holes in the knees of the pants from arresting. Anyway, when I brought the guy in, this old sergeant, he had been in police work 30 years at that point. So, you know, he started probably in the 50s. And he looked at me and he looked at the guy and he goes, listen, if you ever come back here again with your uniform looking like that, and that guy doesn't have a broken arm or a broken leg, you can just not come back to this work, this job. So what he was doing is he was encouraging beating the guy up, right? That's old school, right? Because that was the idea in their head of respect. Listen, you fight with me, I'm going to beat you. And when I beat you, you're going to end up respecting me because you're going to be afraid of me. That is all gone now. That's no more. But that's the school that I came from. So if I would have been in a class where a guy came in, now, if he was a police officer before, that might have changed things. Right. But if he was just some psychologist coming in and go, okay, you know, to prevent PTSD, you got to do ABC, I would have laughed at him. I said, you don't know. You know, you don't know. Plus, you want to be the tough guy. Hey, you know, that doesn't affect me. Oh, you know, I'm a warrior. You know, but that's not what we're feeling inside. You know, that's just the outward projection we're doing.
Yeah, this
Hey,
is where
Norm,
you are the asset. You could be such a big asset to
Yeah.
the
I
police
really would
force.
like to be. I hope and I pray that someday I can.
Mhm.
But it's so, like I said, it's so judgmental that they're just going to have a mental block about me. He's a crook. He's a so. But I hope so. Thank you, though. That's very nice.
Hey, Norm, let's delve into your book. Tell us a little bit about the information in your book and how it can help people.
Well, I think a lot of us don't realize that trauma, being oppressed from our trauma, is not because of the traumatic event. Okay, when we endure a traumatic event, it's how we respond to that event that dictates our future mental health, and our future of peace, of joy, or anger and resentment. And it took me a while to realize that I was judging these people that I was arresting. I was judging God for allowing this to happen, because this is why I didn't believe. I didn't believe that there could be a kind, loving God and all these things in the world happening. I mean, why? And I think that's one of the greatest questions: why does God allow suffering? But when you study the Bible and you read it, you see God's plan for salvation, and you see that it's not him. He is a kind and loving God, but because there's evil people in the world, these things happen. So when you start to change your worldview into believing in a higher power, I'm gonna say God, but I'll put out higher power, that they are in charge, right? It takes the pressure off of us to be that warrior, to be that that macho guy that can handle everything, right? Because I believe everything happens for a reason. I believe that God allows us to go through things. He doesn't necessarily cause everything, but there's things that he could put us through to hone us, right? It's called trial by fire, right? Fire is refining you. And those trials end up making us better people, right? None of us have ever been better without adversity,
Right.
like the doctor stated. So it's through adversity that we become better. We become more Christ-like, or more into what he wants us to become. And you can see that not only the people that you mentioned, but the mothers against drunk driving, that the mother there who lost her daughter, she tragic, but she made great things happen through that, saved millions of people.
Right.
So when you understand that there is a greater thing out there than yourself, and that they're in control. I mean, not like robots and stuff like that. We have the choice of making our own decisions. I think that we see that we could only heal through spirituality, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And that doesn't have to be the Christian God. That could be anything.
Any religion, any God. And because you highlighted a very important point, I think faith and spiritual belief, this strengthens a leader. So often as leader, we have to go through so many trials. People, when I was starting my nonprofit, leaving my full-time job as a faculty, everybody was telling me, are you crazy? Your security is gone and all this thing. I'm taking money from my retirement fund. So it was the crazy, irrational decision. But I had that faith that if I'm in the right path, then God will direct me. So I'm a Muslim faith, but it's the same faith we have. And unbelievably, like I'm meeting Coach, then I'm meeting John, the right people are coming my way. The doors are opening up. So I think when you have that courage and confidence, I think it comes from the faith and spiritual belief. So it doesn't always have to be religion. You have to be spiritual. And you highlighted that point. And our thoughts can make us sick, or our thoughts can make us better. So I think your book and your life experiences can add those value to so many people. So if I ask you, like a young person, a few days ago, a young man who was addicted, and now he's trying to get back in the track. he was telling me that I'm 26 years old and I already ruined it. I did not complete my college degree. I did not do this. I'm into this addiction. So I already ruined it. How can I make myself better? There is no path back. So what would be your advice to such young men who feel that they have already destroyed through their mistakes, their life through mistakes, and there is no point of returning back?
Well, I would try to encourage them by saying that things are changing, right? We're used to be where a job, any type of a drug crime or something would basically disqualify you from these jobs. But now the way things are is it's becoming more prevalent. Everybody knows an addict. I mean, I don't think anybody does not know someone that's been affected by this opioid crisis, right? So we got a better understanding. I truly believe that God will put it in your heart what you want to do. So when I look back on my experience in prison, I go to Fort Worth and there's a seminary there. I mean, what are the chances, right? So even if that was a chance, okay. So I come to Lompoc. I was in Lompoc. There's another seminary there. I mean, I can't choose where I want to go, right? They just ship me out where they want to send me. And then a community college comes in with a drug addiction program. It's like God is like slapping me in the face. Hey, look, this is the direction I want you to go. And I think that God puts people in your lives. I truly believe that this discussion today was ordained. I don't believe that it was an accident or coincidence that we're all talking. I believe that this is going to help somebody who's listening to it, and I pray that it blesses them. So everything happens for a reason. And getting back to the reason why I wrote the book was to document that, to show that healing is not that difficult if you're willing to face your demons. That's the hard part. And that's what we teach our guys in recovery too. If you're willing to go back to those difficult times, deal with that incident, forgive who you need to forgive, ask for forgiveness for who you need to ask for, you're going to be able to move forward. And I didn't really believe, and before this, that was true. I believe that once you went through an incident, it's done, your life is over, just like this gentleman was talking to you. So when I realized it was, I'm not saying it's easy. I shouldn't have used that word, but when you realize that it's possible to heal with the work, it's a phenomenal. There was so many years that I hated myself. I really hated myself. I disliked my life. I was not happy, although I had two beautiful children, a great wife, a great job, a retirement job. But I wasn't looking at that, right? I was looking at me. Okay, I got this disease, Then when at Fort Worth, there was a hospital there. I worked in the hospital and I saw these guys dying of liver disease and of cancer. How dare I think that my neuropathy is so bad when these people are dying of cancer and dying of all these things? It's all in how we perceive life. Right. And I think that's why I wrote the book, is because I want to show others that you too can have peace and joy by looking at your life through a different lens, right? And yes, it was for me, but I truly believe that even if you don't believe in God, I think that if you believe that these spiritual principles and laws are paralleling secular teachings, that you could still heal, not just cope with your addictions. And that's the problem with recovery nowadays, is that we teach these guys to cope with their addiction, or I shouldn't say addiction, triggers. They cope with their triggers, and the triggers are based on their life events that they've been through, right? But if we could teach them to heal, but then the church and state comes into play, so it becomes a little bit more difficult. But that's why I wrote the book, is I didn't realize it was that. I don't want to say simple or easy, but possible. I didn't believe it was possible to heal. I thought my whole life I'm just going to live this miserable existence of isolation, anger, and bitterness, resentment.
Yeah. A powerful story, Norman. And we're just about out of time, but thank you so much for joining us. I've certainly learned a lot. And I think our young and emerging leaders, even if you're not in law enforcement or, you know, whatever role you're in life, whether it's a professional one or in your personal life, it's just important to remember to have some mercy and some grace on people, because you don't know what they've been through. They didn't come from the same background as you, and that could very much have an impact on what they're going through today. And I think that's and offering them that help, whether it be that secular help or that faith-based help, that's all something that can help us cope and heal, like you said, Norm. Finally, real quick here before we wrap up, how can we get your book, Christ-Centered Healing, and how can we, if we want to learn more about you or get in touch with you, is there a good way to do that as well?
Yeah, I have a website, which is Christ-centeredhealing.com. And you could get links to buy the book there. You can buy the books on Amazon. You can email me if anyone out there is suffering and just can't seem to move forward in their life. You know, email me. We'll talk and we'll see. There's always a way to do it. It's just a matter of seeking out the help. And you were talking about leaders, and it's so important for leaders to stay in tune with their subordinates. You know, that they really need to, if they see any personality changes, any medical changes in the way they conduct themselves, their behavior or their attitudes, please, you know, sit down over a cup of coffee or something and are you all right? I mean, if maybe one of my my bosses would have said that, and I might have just said, you know, I'm not doing that good right now, and that could have prevented me from the prison, most likely. But again, the prison was a good experience for me. But anyway, keep an eye on your people.
Absolutely. Norm Wielsch, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time, and we know that your story here can help somebody out there listening. So thank you so much.
Thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Norm. It was great to have you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Limitless Leadership Lounge. Be sure to review us. Be sure to rate us, whatever platform you're on: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Spreaker, Google Podcasts, and there's like 37 more too. Thank you so much. You have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll catch you next week on the Limitless Leadership Lounge.